is, let's say you take someone that you don't like.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, someone that you don't like, most of the things they say you're going to just inherently disagree with.
Mm-hmm.
You're just going to be like, I don't like how they said it. I don't like the tone of voice, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
All of that kind of stuff. Now, do a thought experiment.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine that the person that is saying this is someone that you love.
Yeah.
You absolutely love. You think they walk on water. Not that they're Jesus, but you just, this is someone that you love. Now imagine they're saying the exact words.
Mm-hmm.
Do your assumptions change?
Mm-hmm.
That's just kind of a good filter to overlay on life. Hey guys, welcome to Foothills Studio Conversation. I think we're at episode 9-ish. Sorry if the title says something different.
We'll see.
We are going to be talking today about something that Mark brought to me early in the morning.
So early in the morning.
I don't know if I've had time to process, so this will be interesting. But
I made a point to wake up at 5, so I have more of my day. And I think clearly, like early in the morning for some reason, as weird as that seems, because it's like...
No, I'm there with you.
Okay.
Once I wake up.
Yeah. Give it how long does it take you to wake up?
I don't know, 20, 30 minutes, something like that.
I'm like an hour.
Oh, okay,
so,
fair enough.
And that's when
Maybe I'm being generous to myself.
I think I hit you up like right before that, so we'll see if this makes sense. So essentially... I don't know why I have those preliminary words. What I wanted to talk about was motivations.
Okay.
Very fundamental thing. We all have them, whether we like it or not. If you're getting up out of bed in the morning and going and doing stuff, you have motivations. That's just kind of the thing.
Or obligations.
But even then, an obligation, you're motivated for some reason to fulfill that obligation.
All right.
If you weren't motivated to... You probably wouldn't, except for like being motivated not to be punished by something. I was
just logicked.
Yeah.
Well done.
And not motivational speaking necessarily, because I feel like looking on YouTube for titles and seeing motivation or anything like that, you'll think, oh, a motivational speaker.
Right.
Or the fun, there's a clip where they took all the motivational speeches from movies, like Braveheart, like Independence Day,
right.
And they just kind of like clipped them all together to kind of make like a non-sentence that sounded really great.
It's the music swells.
It's like a great 3 minutes of your life of just feeling like I can do anything.
Right. But that's not what we're talking about.
That's not what we're doing. We're talking about, because motivational speaking can be like, again, it's just some sort of sentence that sounds so good and gets you pumped, but ultimately doesn't really like I need to rewatch that to be remotivated in that sense. We're talking about the daily motivations that are just kind of intrinsically in you, that just get you going through life. Like it's the reason for being, it's the reason for getting up, it's the reason why you do the actions that you do. And I know that can get very nuanced, because there's like little actions that we have, or there's multiple reasons behind the things that we do. But the first thing that I want to ask, from the motivations topic, is how do you know your motivation? And well, let's start with what is your motivation, Bryce? Like just for some things, lay out some examples.
Okay. So I guess it is really hard to like articulate your motive, because I mean, a lot of times we just kind of autopilot stuff.
Yeah, totally.
So this is not totally formulated.
Mm-hmm.
I would think like just kind of base level motivation is God.
Mm-hmm.
And that's super vague. But, the call that he has, at least, so I'm a husband and a father.
Yeah.
So the call that he has on husbands and fathers to serve, to guide, to protect, provide, all this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that's always kind of there. And then, but to be honest, like when I wake up in the morning,
mm-hmm.
like, and when I'm
feeling like P. Diddy.
Oh my goodness. When I am coming to work and I don't want to because Spencer's been up so many times and I'm tired and yada yada yada.
Spencer's his kid.
Yes, youngest, almost one.
She's so cute.
She is adorable. I think of my kids. I think of my wife and where we would be currently if I did not have this job. And we did not start our company with our friends to get that extra income so my wife could stay home right now. And so that motivates me to do well, to get a paycheck, to let us be in this space that we're at right now, which might eventually change. But family is a huge motivator.
Yeah.
And as far as like the kind of spiritual stuff, ultimately it is serving, and it's a hierarchy for me. It would be like God, family, me, church, work, other.
Yeah.
I mean, kind of somewhere in there. Just so, I mean, that's my motivation on good days.
On the good days.
Obviously,
that's
there's
fair.
a lot of selfish motivations every day and all that kind of stuff.
For sure.
I mean, that's
for sure. Yeah, and not to be confused with taking care of yourself and those kind of motivations, because those are good. You can't take care of yourself.
Right.
What good are you to do anything else outside of that? You got to be motivated in there. So, like for me, I'm learning more and more that I am relationally motivated. That there's a difference between me and some other people who are more driven by their jobs or achieving something, even maybe not even just jobs, but like a deeper. Like I'm doing something, I'm getting stuff done, I'm building, I'm making that happen. That's in me too, but it's just not the full driver that I find in my life.
Same with me.
And I've told you this before, and I'll tell you again. Some days, just knowing that you're going to be there, that I get to see you, is a good enough reason to come into work.
Delightful.
Because I don't always want to.
I love you, Mark.
I love you too. I love you too, Bryce Sidney Cooley.
Come on.
Sydney is a great middle name.
It's with an I. It's the masculine.
Oh, it's with an I. Oh, I spelled it wrong in my phone. It's in all caps.
How dare you?
But so being relationally motivated and thinking about like I'm gonna have a good relationship and connection with people. Like I care a lot about that, especially in like a work environment. I will postpone getting the job done to make sure that there's cohesiveness and good connection between all of us.
Sure.
And that's not always good, but that's just how I am, how I'm wired, how that goes.
Right.
But then I also have those primal motivations as well. Don't die. You don't want to suffer. You don't want to do nothing necessarily because there has to be some sort of meaning in us all, like there's this primal drive of knowing that.
Right.
And C.S. Lewis actually talks about that a little bit in some of his books, but I'm not going to get into it. I'm just saying we all have it.
That was vague enough to make people think that you're
that I know what I'm saying. No, I couldn't remember the exact quote, and it would just came back to me. So I know I have these motivations, but again, there's more nuance to it. There's more blending between different things. So a good question to ask on that, and this is kind of dual. But the first one is, how do you actually know your own motivations? Because oftentimes, I don't know about you, but I find myself realizing, like I did about this relational piece to me, as I'm figuring out myself and building a good relationship with myself as well. That used to be off kilter a little bit. Like, how do you actually know your own motivations? How do you find that? You said like you wake up in the morning, the first thing, and so it was like your thoughts are on your family and your kids. Is it just by your thoughts that you can kind of gauge there, or at least it's a good base point?
Well, I mean, certainly you can't like know what your motives are if you never try to think about them. You try to think about the things that are important to you, the things that, I mean, this could be good or bad depending on the thing, but the things you're unwilling to give up. Like family is just always one of those things that like even when I was doing music around Sacramento and stuff, and I knew I wasn't doing it so I could be rich and famous. At some point, I was
Because
like,
you would have been, though.
clearly. At some point, it was just like, I can't wait to share this with my kids. And so it was like more like legacy thoughts and just sharing those kind of things. And so like, I've always kind of had that family stuff in the background. So ultimately, it is very difficult to know your motivations, but a place to start is trying to analyze the things that you do.
Yeah.
And I would also say, kind of calling back to the truth conversation, it's also good to have that done in community, because there are often people who see your motivations way more clearly than you do,
Right.
or will
catch your blind spots as well.
yeah, or they'll question you on it. You know, you'll be like, "Hey, I did this," and they're like, "Oh, why?" And then you'll be like, "Well, I did that because of this," and they're like, "Well, that's quite an assumption." They're like, "Oh, I guess that is an assumption." We have those conversations all the time. I assume a lot. So questioning them yourself, bringing them to the light with people that you trust, and I mean, ultimately, you know, maybe contrasting them or comparing them, however the case may be, to Jesus and the way he acted and the values that he put on different things. Does that match the value that you're putting on it? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean, ultimately, I would say I don't put that much thought into that all the time, because it can be maddening and it's hard to know. Am I sweeping up and doing dishes to bless my wife and kids?
Yeah.
Or am I doing it to get space for my wife and kids?
Yeah.
You know, like,
Well, that's the interesting thing about that is it's like, yes, you're doing it for your wife and kids, or there can be that dual, like, I'm doing it for that and this that serves dual purpose. Is that necessarily bad? Like, and I wouldn't even say getting space is a bad thing, because that's just self care and need at that point. I mean, I don't know. It depending, like, it depends.
It can be, you know.
But
you know, it just depends.
But okay, so I might rephrase.
Did I not answer?
No. It was actually good to actually raise something up else. I was gonna ask a question. I just got to reword it. But before I do that, just to kind of reiterate what you're saying. So essentially, it takes some intentionality in your life.
Yes.
And actually questioning, asking the question, why am I doing this?
Right.
And I don't know if you've ever had that moment. I'm sure plenty of people have had that moment. I hope plenty of people have had that moment. I've had it a few times I can remember, where it's just like you're doing something and then you just realize, wait, why am I doing this in the first place? Like, I really don't need to do this. And maybe it's something that either causes you misery and you're like, oh, I haven't had to do this entire time.
Right.
But I just, like, what's my motivation in doing this? Why have I been doing this? And maybe it's built out of guilt or fear or something like that. So the question that I was going to ask, and now I'm going to rephrase a little bit, how do you know the quality of those motivations? And quality, maybe even in terms of, like, how do you know if those are good motivations? You know?
Yeah. I don't know if I have a solid answer. I mean, certainly there are some things that are like kind of black and white. Like, if your motivation is one that is like full of greed and malice and something that's kind of a black and white thing that scripture is clearly like, don't have greed and malice, and you're like, oh, well, that's a bad motivation. You know, like, there are certain things that you can compare and contrast with scripture, with Jesus' teachings, with the way that he acted and interacted with people, and you can be like, my motivation is clearly counter to that, and so you can be like, well, this is bad. But there are other ones that you can't really, and for those ones, I guess I would go kind of the realm of, how does it all pan out? Like, in the moment, maybe you can't know. And so, like, you know, it's like a well-intentioned law or something, you know, that it goes out there and the plan of it is to lift these people up or solve this problem.
Yeah.
does it do that? Does it lift people up and not cause other things, or does it lift people up and push a ton of other people down,
Right.
or solve this problem and start 20 others? You know, like, so I mean, sometimes it has to be tested by the world,
Yeah. And see what fruit comes out of it.
right.
For sure.
So
Yeah.
there's that.
To judge the quality of it, at least.
Right.
I'm just gonna say this out loud so I can remember it, because this is off the cuff. But we're gonna come back to this as well.
Most of this is off the cuff.
Yeah, it's a conversation. We're just we're rolling.
Yeah.
Motivations is kind of a central point in the movement, where I think motivation leads to action.
Okay.
But then what precedes motivation? I would say that's belief.
Yeah, I mean, belief in whatever you're believing.
Yeah, belief in whatever you're believing will lead into motivation, and so on and so forth. But I just found it so interesting when you were bringing up doing the dishes and saying, like, am I doing it for this or am I doing it for that? And it was kind of like a good and bad contrast, like judging what it is. But then I brought up self-care is not necessarily, like, getting space is not necessarily a bad thing. It just, the nuance of it can be, I guess.
Right.
But well, maybe I was assuming, at least. We'll get back to this, but to move on from there, we have this tendency to assume motivation of others.
Yes.
Right? And that doesn't seem to always work out so well. Like, we look into the
almost never.
Yeah. And if anything, I would say when you start actually looking at your own motives and figuring out, like, why do I do these kind of things, and figuring out how complicated that looks and can be, I feel like that should give us some grace room when we actually approach others. Mm-hmm. But it seems like, especially nowadays, like, look politically, look culturally, things like that, any celebrity that gets so harshly judged for something, like, we just go, no, I know exactly what you're doing. I know exactly what your motivation is and why you do this kind of thing. And then you just lay down your judgments on that.
Right.
Like, I know you better than you know yourself, essentially. Mm-hmm. When in reality, I don't know myself as well as I think I know myself. Mm-hmm. So why should I even think that I know who you are? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I can give you 3, hopefully quick examples.
Okay, that's what I need.
1, let's say husband and wife conversation through text.
Yeah.
It goes awry.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe someone's giving one-word answers.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe because on their end, they're super busy at work, at home, mm-hmm. whatever the case may be. So one person's trying to have a conversation, the other's like, yeah, fine, mm-hmm. okay. Mm-hmm. Almost always you read that, yeah, fine, okay, almost always. Like you.
If there's a period, or if there's an exclamation point, there's a difference. Smiley face.
Yeah. I guess unless there's smiley emojis after literally everything that's said.
And even for some people, it's like, if there's not 3 smiley faces, I must be in trouble. Like, you just build up that norm of how it should work.
So a lot of times this assumption of motivation can be seen in relationships like that, through text mm-hmm. or whatever, through body language within a relationship.
Yeah.
On a wider, like, kind of cultural, political, we recently had that situation in Washington, D.C., where there are those kids waiting for their bus outside the Lincoln Memorial. Mm-hmm. Someone publishes a 30-second clip of a young kid, 16, 17, I can't remember mm-hmm. his age, mm-hmm. kind of awkwardly smiling at an older Native American gentleman, and people from both sides of the spectrum pounced. Mm-hmm. This is what evil is. This mm-hmm. is blah, 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 blah. Not knowing any context, not knowing what was going on, just going based off this 30-second clip and someone's mm-hmm. description of it. Mm-hmm. Or we can look at the State of the Union. Mm-hmm. You know, Trump says ABC, conservatives go, yay, yay, yay. Yeah. Democrats say, you're playing to your base, you're blah, 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 you know, whatever. When there could have been a lot of good stuff informing what he's saying mm-hmm. and the stats that he's throwing out there and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. But people are like, well, I like him or I don't like him, therefore I assume these motivations upon him and I accept or decline based off that. Yeah. So it is all over the place right now.
Mm-hmm.
We live in such a reactive culture
Mm-hmm.
that people just, it's easier to assume a motive than to do the homework to figure it out.
Yeah, it's almost like we lost the phrase "benefit of the doubt,"
Yes, we have
which
definitely lost that phrase.
we gratefully accept it if we're not too critical of ourselves or like harsh, because that's the dark side of being so self-aware all the time that you're just always thinking, "Am I doing the right things? Am I matching it up perfectly?"
Right.
I saw an episode of The Good Place, funny show. Um,
Yeah,
it's
I've
like
heard.
an offshoot of of what
Right.
the biblical heaven is, but it's like the point system heaven, kind of
Right.
that whole weird belief system. Um, and there's one episode where this one guy who does like everything by the T. He makes sure he picks up everything, like all the trash off the ground, picks up everything, all his toys, and picks up trash off the ground. Like he's making like these judgments to make sure that he doesn't lose any points and he gets into the good place.
Right.
But it's like he's manic essentially,
Right.
and he's just so like living out that dark space. But where was I jumping off that? What were you just talking about?
The assumption of motive that
The-
we put on people.
Yes. It's kind of ridiculous, like to not be able to give benefit of the doubt to others, like in view of them. And assuming that they're not also like we're doing the work and questioning their own motives out of this. I don't know. Yeah, our culture's gone cray on that a little bit.
Yes.
So, and all of this comes out of, I mean, where I thought about this topic specifically is out of the classic verse, Psalm 139. That's actually the whole chapter. But at the end of it, where it says, "Search me, O God, show me my anxious thoughts, and show me where I'm at fault," and that kind of stuff. Right. The long version of what it is, because David is more poignant than I.
Yeah,
he's written a lot more verses and rhymes than I've dropped out there. But it's just this essentially. Not gonna derail. I got this.
He's gonna derail.
It's essentially the recognition of like there's so much that I don't know about myself.
Right.
Like there's so much that just needs to be figured out inside of me. And so in light of thinking of others, like how can I even think about doing that? How can I even think about making a judgment on someone rather than just doing the work to ask the questions? Because honestly, sometimes it can just be out of laziness of asking the question of why did you do this? And maybe that'll make them think about it too for the first time of like, oh, I had no idea when I was doing this.
Yeah, well, and Sam even said in the Truth podcast, I like how he said, like, I know a lot, or I don't know a lot more than I know. You know, like
totally.
We don't mind speaking incredibly confidently on things we know nothing about. Like that is, I mean, what are we doing literally right now?
Yeah.
We're speaking very confidently about motivation and the core essence of it. And I'm like, I've never studied motivation.
Yeah,
like,
neither have I. Like
this is just my thoughts.
Another example on that, shedding light on kind of like the lenses that we have for life as well. So I'm a relational person. We did this whole test in the office called the SDI test, which is like 3 core. It's for conflict, but it shows motivations in people and how they do. So like I said, I'm a relational type. And typically in conflict, I approach conflict in that way. It's a relational, like I care about this right here. I care about like what's going on with you. I want to take care of that, like your frustrations and things like that. That's my go-to. But there's some people who are drivers, and that's just their general way of life. It's like I want to go and I want to get things done. I want to be efficient about it.
Right.
Sometimes they'll steamroll. Like that's just like a basic attribute that could be a part of it. Not necessarily.
Sure.
There's the more analytical thinkers who, and these are all like generalities. Sure. Everyone is their own special color in life, but it's a general way of thinking, and it's a lot of people have it. So like the analytical thinkers who think more about the numbers and how to be strategic about a situation, and so conflict arises, they're going to be more like, okay, where's the issue? How can we like navigate through this?
Logic our way out of
let's
it.
logic our way through this and make sense of what's actually happening here.
Right.
Whereas the drivers will be like, I just want to get this done, fix it, be done. But the issues that come out of there is I can look at a driver, see them getting things done, and think, you don't care about this relationship at all. You don't care about any of your relationships. You're just trying to be efficient, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And that may not be the true motivation of them.
Right.
It's just how they're getting it done.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is benefit to being efficient. There's relational benefit to being efficient. The fact that we're not just dragging along through life, just trying to like fix everyone's problems or doing anything like that. But it's like, no, we got to get something done right now. This will be good for us.
Mm-hmm.
Or even I'm driven to get this stuff done because I care about you so much.
Right.
Doug is actually a perfect example of the driver type, where he likes to get stuff done. But like the more I spend time with that guy, the more I like know his heart behind all of it, because he keeps expressing it. I keep seeing it in the undertones and everything that's happening there. His motivation is out of love for the students, is out of love for the body of Christ, is out of love for God, and love for me too. And my duty in that as well, being the relational type, is to bring it up and say, hey, I need a little bit of relationship right now. Can you make some time for that?
Right.
And me and Doug are actually good at pulling on each other for when, hey, I think you're being a little too not thinking about the relational part of this. I think you're being a little too drivey, because we have our blind spots. But yeah, it's just those lenses that we have that change the way that we'll view a situation, you know? Whereas the motivations can all be good.
Right.
It's just the lenses at that point.
Right.
So let's jump back to Psalm 139.
Okay.
Right quick.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Because I did some when I sent you that text of this is what I want to do, I was reading thoroughly through this, and I freaking love this chapter.
Great.
So it starts out with God, there's nowhere I can run from you. There's nowhere that I can hide. There's nothing that I can do to get away from you. You see through darkness, you see in light, you know every single thought inside me. In fact, you know me so intimately, you knit me in my mother's womb, and that kind of stuff. And then he talks about how like, and God, I'm totally for you, I'm against evil, like forget that, and then search out like the things that are in me that are wrong, because he recognizes that he has those blind spots, or he has just that one lens of life.
Right.
And essentially what it all kind of points to is that we need this pure source to be able to line our motivations up against. And even in the nuance, be able to kind of figure that out. Because I kind of view like, so a motivation on one thing can have so many facets to it. And the more that we keep pursuing God, the more we kind of just cut away at the things that aren't actually good motivation, because he reveals it. He's the purest source. He's omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, and he's holy, without fault. And so he is the best example to be able to match that up with in our lives. I don't know if you want to expand on that at all, or can you
phrase it in a question to me? Like, I understand what you're saying.
Pull out, like, do you see that in your own life? Do you see, like, the difference between I'm just trying to do my best and just, like, I'm trying to be loving, and I'm trying to be loving matched up to following God and having him weed that stuff out of my life? Like, there's a difference, for sure. I mean, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, given that question, I mean, when I think of love, and we talked about this in our love podcast, like
our love podcast,
Foothills Studio Love Conversations. It's the idea that like the cultural idea of love is kind of different than God's idea of love, and God's idea of love means sacrifice, it means consequence. It's difficult in a sense, and so it is not what people would normally use to motivate themselves to action, because we kind of take the path of least resistance most of the time. And so most motivations are like, how can I ease my life, whereas a godly motivation might be, how can I serve others even if it makes my life a little more difficult? And
yeah, the difference between definitions on what love is.
right.
Yeah.
And so ultimately, like, God would be weeding away your need to take the path of least resistance. I guess weeding away, that is not a thing.
Yeah.
But he would be pruning. There it is. He would be pruning that kind of stuff. So like, when first your response would be, I'm going to do this because of this.
Yeah.
You're going to get past that one. And then maybe you have another offshoot and you go to that for a while, but you're submitting yourself to Jesus, and then you get past that one. And ultimately, maybe you can get to that constant, because left to your own devices, left to societal, whatever, your motivations, what you think's good, all that stuff's going to change over time, because unless we're foundationed on something constant, will just always change.
Right, with culture, because that's always changing.
Right.
Every
So ultimately, I guess that's kind of where I would see those things working together.
And you would see the difference between just good motivation, as someone would call it, and God's motivation behind things, because I think God's God's motivation is going to change you, I think. Yeah. Like, if that's where you're pulling from, that pure source that is above you, it's going to change you, it's going to stretch you, it's not going to be easy. Whereas our autopilot, our unintentional autopilot motivation strategy typically will lead us to stagnation and crumble.
Yeah, burnout sometimes.
Yeah.
All that stuff.
Or will unknowingly pick up something that'll just corrupt the whole. Like, you see people who start with good intentions on something there's tons of movies about this part of the human condition,
right?
Where it's like, he started out with his charity and he just wanted to help the world, and then he started realizing that he could also make lots of money off this, and then cared more about that than his charity, and did some bad moves and found himself in a terrible place and crumbled or whatever. Like, I don't know.
I watched the Fire Festival documentary too.
How did you know that's what I was thinking?
So, now this can just be a little contained thing.
Yeah. Okay.
So keep where you're going. But with that idea, there is a benefit to assuming motives. So I know that we have taken all the time to say, don't assume anyone's motives. I'm going to say asterisks, but sometimes do.
Yes. Jesus did. I mean, he knew because he's God, knew the poignant times to be like, no, I know the motive of your heart. Well, because he's God, and call it out as well. Yeah.
I think it is good to have a healthy skepticism in pretty much all areas of life. You can take church, like, you shouldn't just take what a pastor says as God's inerrant word, because it's not. It is an interpretation of God's inerrant word. And if that pastor is in community and receiving feedback and trying to be as true to the Bible as possible, then you're probably good. But do you really want to risk that to the possible corruption of your belief, your family's belief, all this kind of stuff? So it is good to have a healthy skepticism, use the leading of the Holy Spirit, just kind of that, like, something feels off here.
Right.
Maybe talk to some trusted people and get some feedback. Hey, I'm feeling this. Are you feeling that? What about and just go back and forth. Like, it is good to have a healthy skepticism, not to assume that the pastor in this case is trying to lead you astray, but just not to assume that they're fully right, because if they are wrong, if they know they're wrong and they're doing it, God will have some words with them at some point, according to James 3. Not many of us should presume to be teachers. There's that whole thing.
Yeah, terrifying.
But you could possibly, by assuming that they're not 100% right, you could end up helping them. Like, what if their interpretation is wrong, and you can go to them and be like, hey, what about this, and go back and forth, and you both grow, and it's all good. So
but even that's going in not assuming the motive was ill,
right? I mean, I guess in that case it's more assuming that what you're hearing is true.
Yeah.
Like you so yeah,
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
maybe that was a pointless diatribe.
No, that was a great diatribe. That's a really good point. Uh, and kind of ties into where I wanted to jump back to the belief preceding motivation, motivation preceding action. Because this jumped out of when you talked about the dishes. So
I did talk about
going
dishes.
back to that, and this isn't necessarily your intent. You can speak to that, or if it was or wasn't. But I think doing this intentional process of seeking out your own motivations with God will also shed light on bad belief, because bad belief could lead to bad motivation, which leads to action that could be detrimental to you or to someone else, such as believing like self-care is bad,
Right.
you know? And so being able to ask like, wait, why am I doing this and suffering like right now? Do I believe that I'm not worth taking care of in this moment?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and balancing that with what does God say about taking care of myself? Like, what's my belief on that? What do I need to change in that? Will change my motivation for what I'm doing and actually see it as, oh, isn't a bad motivation at all to take care of myself.
Right.
Maybe not the right time. I don't know, because that's also a thing. But
Sure.
that's the nuance of it. And
well, yeah,
the
I
more you
mean,
grow, the more you know. Hopefully.
There's a classic "love your neighbor as yourself." How you normally hear that is like it's about loving your neighbor and serving your neighbor and all that, but
Right.
the implication there is you're loving them in the same way that you've learned to love yourself, and out of an overflow, you're loving them. I talked to a guy at Young Adults this week. He was there not because he doesn't have a fellowship. He does. He goes to actually Bayside Granite Bay. And I'm like, oh, why are you here? And he's like, I do a lot of volunteering and I give a lot and I just don't get a lot. So it's like pouring out of an empty cup. You know, you need to have that self-care and love yourself enough to fill up that cup so you can pour it out in that sense.
I like that. I guess I only have like one more thing to go on this with, and I would say that the whole judging motivations and things like that, sometimes it's easy to judge whether a motivation is good based on the ease of it. Like you said, path of least resistance.
Okay.
And I just think that's important enough to hit again on. Sometimes that might be the worst motivation possible in a situation of thinking like, well, this is the easiest and I'm just going to do it, or just going on autopilot and doing like, I think that these are the things that are detrimental to becoming better, becoming more like Christ.
Right.
When we aren't intentional with questioning ourselves, when we're not intentional about asking God, who knows it all, who sees it all, who put us together and has good intention for us to not be intentional in asking him to just shed light on the crud in our lives.
Right.
Yeah. And that's not going to be easy, but I think that's important in becoming mature adults and Christians.
Yeah. I think just in general as Christians, like self-reflection is so important. And I would say self-reflection in prayer and just you thinking about kind of that kind of stuff. I mean, because ultimately, sorry if this upsets you, but I think we're all kind of garbage. and maybe I'll just say me to not upset people. But I mean, there is just, the more I understand myself, the more I realize, like, man, I am messed up. And ultimately, the more that makes me thankful for Jesus and what he did. But it is important because a lot of times, like, I've talked to people who are like, yeah, I just don't, everything's good. I don't need counseling. Like, why do people need counseling? I'm like, literally everyone needs counseling. Like, I mean, maybe I'm just a broken individual, so I think everyone needs counseling, but ultimately we all need some kind of
Anyone who's had a parent needs counseling. How about that?
there you go. That leaves a couple people out. So ultimately I think like self-reflection and getting input from the community is just super good. I this is just more of a practical thought. You can close out however you want, but when it comes to assuming stuff about people, one exercise that I find interesting is, let's say you take someone that you don't like. Typically someone that you don't like, most of the things they say you're going to just inherently disagree with. You're just going to be like, I don't like how they said it. I don't like the tone of voice, whatever. All of that kind of stuff. Now, do a thought experiment. Imagine that the person that is saying this is someone that you love.
Yeah.
You absolutely love. You think they walk on water. Not that they're Jesus, but you just, this is someone that you love. Now imagine they're saying the exact words. Do your assumptions change? That's just kind of a good filter to overlay on life. Sometimes you've had a rough week with your spouse and they say something well-intentioned, but you have the background of that really rough week, and so you take it the wrong way. But if your best friend would have said the same thing, you'd have been like, "Oh, thanks." Just try to look at your interactions with people and even news and politics. Try to look at it from that mindset. If someone who was on my team or on my side said it, would I still be upset? No, I'm not saying if the answer to that is yes, hey, just be upset and live in that. But that can at least be an indicator of, am I being somewhat objective about this?
Yeah.
Am I assuming a lot of motives? Yeah. Or is it just that I don't like this person?
Right.
Or whatever.
Right. Because we all have the propensity to do good as much as to do evil.
Yeah.
Every single one of us, and that should be a humbling experience in, as I like to say, help us expand the umbrella of grace.
There you go.
Realizing that we are human.
Garbage people.
That we're garbage people, but also picking up the garbage around your neighborhood. It sounds like you could be a garbage man.
That's my side job.
Garbage people. Yeah. I guess
great profession.
It is. Where would we be without them? It'd just be a smelly world. I guess the points to really just reiterate are the stop living on autopilot.
Yeah.
Like actually start being intentional, not obsessive, but just intentional with your life and examining yourself. And do that with people around you. People who actually will call you out on stuff, not just yes people. Yes, men and women.
No.
No.
Yes.
Those who will also say no.
There you go.
When you go, is this good? Maybe, yeah. It's just a healthy practice, but also doing that with God and asking him, God, shed light on. And I know he will, because he has plenty of times in my life. Even when I haven't asked, he's been like, well, gonna call you out anyways, because
this time?
This is not gonna be great.
Yeah.
And he's a God who formed you in your mother's womb.
Yeah.
He cares.
Yeah.
Like he loves you more than your mother, and that's hard to do on any human. Like no
Moms
human
are
can do it.
awesome.
Moms are awesome.
Yeah.
Stop assuming that you know the motives of everyone around you. If anything, let your self-discovery and how little you know about yourself give you grace for other people around you. Learn benefit of the doubt.
There you go. Relearn.
And all of this stuff is kind of like working out. Like if you haven't run for 15 years, and so you start running, and it's really hard to do at the beginning.
Right.
But then it just kind of becomes practice and is a little bit easier. You start to examine these things, and you start to realize, like, I have these beliefs inside me or about others or about whatever that aren't true.
Right.
Like, they're not based on God's word and how he is or anything like that. Like, and you will begin, God through you as well will begin to weed out prune these things out of your life. But also make sure that God is the standard. Like God's truth, God's love, God's mercy, grace, and justice. Not just our own conception of what that might be.
Right.
Because you will find it to be lacking in a lot of areas. And maybe even only self-serving. Like the common cultural version of love, which is like almost there sometimes. Like sometimes they almost get it, but it lacks. It's still transactional. It's still more self-serving than it is about something beyond ourselves, which would be Jesus.
And with that, we bid you adieu. If you guys have any insight, think we got something off, think we missed something, and you want,
we probably did,
and you want to talk a little more about that, shoot us an email, Bryce or Mark at foothillscp.org. At Foothills.
If you'd like to tell us how cool our new chairs look,
at Foothills CP on Twitter and Instagram and on the Facebook page, all that good stuff. So we're gonna try to get on a more regular schedule with these. It'll be
Bryce, when are we gonna release the podcast version of this?
This will be released on Fridays. The audio.
Cool. Hey, when are we gonna release the video parts?
You're killing me. The video part should be released by the following Tuesday. You'll see this on Wednesday or Thursday. So subscribe to the podcast.
Smash that subscribe button.
Subscribe to the YouTube
Hit the bell
channel
for the alerts so you can keep up to date with these episodes.
Leave comments, all that good stuff. We would love to get feedback.
It's true.
And be informed on motivations in a way that we are not.
Yeah, because, well, sometimes we lack in motivation to do things or to think that hard.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
See you guys.
See ya.